Hey guys, welcome to another episode of From Trees into These. Today we're going to talk about making a parting tool, and in the spirit of going with carbide tools and homemade, do-it-yourself, we're going to make a carbide parting tool out of an old saw blade. So we're going to actually go down into the metal shop instead of the wood shop today, and come along, you might learn something. So we're going to head on down to the metal shop, which is just downstairs from the wood shop. Sorry about the mess. Keep meaning to clean it up, but there's always a project going on. So as promised, we're going to do a carbide parting tool out of an old saw blade. As you can see here, I actually got this one from my grandfather before he died almost 20 years ago. He even still has his name on it there. I think he'd probably be happy that it's still going to good use. And you can see here, it's a regular carbide blade. This one is really, really old, so I'm not real excited about the carbide that's on there. It's really worn down, as you can see. It has not a whole lot of bite left to it, but we're going to use a diamond sharpening stone and get that sharpened up before we put it into use. First of all, we're going to have to cut a section of this out. And we're going to do that by aligning the straight edge with the angle of the carbide bit here. I did get this idea off of YouTube. It's not my own original idea. I wish it was, but we're going to have a little bit of fun here today and maybe get a pretty nice working tool out of it. So if you think about when we're going to use this tool, we want the carbide edge here to be parallel with the work on the lathe. So I want to make sure and cut this tool so that it is definitely parallel with the angle of the carbide bit. If I were to go off of an angle here, it wouldn't line up very well, and it would just be more of a scraper than a cutting bit. So we're going to align that just perfect, and see what we can do to cut this. I'm going to make it wide enough so that it has some good strength to it. I don't want it to be too flexible. I would just normally go with a narrow tool here, but I'm going to take an angle off of it and go with a fairly wide, maybe 3/4 to an inch of thickness to it, so that we have a little bit more strength. Make sure that's good and parallel there. Notice I'm using a green Sharpie here. It'll show up a little bit better on the blade than even a black or a silver. And honestly, it's just because I don't have a black Sharpie out here in the shop today. So I'm going to cut this because it's going to be a pretty rigid tool steel. I'm going to cut it with a cutoff wheel as opposed to just taking it over to my bandsaw and cutting it. The bandsaw, it's got a bimetal blade on it, but it may end up dulling it with this high temper steel here. So I'm going to use a consumable cutoff wheel. That way, if it wears it down, who cares? I change it out for $1 or $2 and it's all good. As always, you want to use safety precautions. I'm going to use eye protection always when you're grinding. Hearing protection, because I'd like to be able to still hear when I'm in the ripe old age of oldness. And we're just going to go ahead and grind along the line here. Get that out of the way. Here we go. Should be able to just bend this excess stock right off. a little bit hot. And there we go. We'll do the same thing for this top line, and then we'll grind off these edges to make them a little bit smoother. I'm thinking that should probably be enough. I'm sure it's mighty hot by now, so I'm going to use some pliers here. But now we've got our nice carbide tool set. We're going to cut these carbides off. I'd hate to have a catch there and have it cut your hand off, but yeah, I'm thinking it's looking all right. We'll clean it up now. I decided to cut a little bit of extra stock off with this one because you never know what I might be able to come up with for use on this. You know, carbide's good. We're going to go ahead and change out this cutting wheel to a flap disc. Basically, it's just a whole bunch of little pieces of sandpaper glued over the top of each other, so as it spins, it just takes off and it basically sands it. I'm also going to do the initial rough stuff with a regular angle grinder. It's nice to have multiple grinders so you're not always switching out wheels. I think I have 4 or 5 of them at least, so it makes life easy just to switch back and forth instead of always having to change out stuff. Okay, I'm just going to give it a quick brush up with the grinder here. We'll switch over to the flap disc. It'll take a lot less off and it'll clean it up a little bit. And you'll see I'll actually clean up this rust here too. I don't want to put it too far out because it gets this harmonic vibration and makes it a little more difficult. Alright, as you can see, we've got the completed chunk here. Not the straightest cut in the world, but we're going to build a handle for this anyway. It's going to be pretty long, so we have good control. Next step, I think, is to sharpen up this carbide bit here. We're going to use a 600 grit diamond stone. This is a two-sided. There's a 150 on this side and a 600 over here. We might actually start taking it down a little bit with the 150 first and then hone it out at 600 grit. And the main point is to keep this clamped down and keep a perfect angle on that so that we shave the top of it off, not the face here, and that way you're going to get that clean sharp edge right on the edge there. Something I should have mentioned earlier is on this blade here, it's a skip tooth blade. Some of the carbides are angled in this direction, some are angled in this direction. The very first one, the top one here, like the one that we took out, is a straight cut. That's why I chose to use that one, because it is a straighter cut. I don't know if you can see that or not. So let's go ahead and sharpen it up. I'm just taking a wire brush and cleaning up the 20-plus-year-old sawdust that's gripped on there and get a nice clean surface. There we go. That looks a lot better. I don't know if you can see with the angle of the light, but that way we have something nice to start out with. I'm going to give it a little bit of cutting oil on here to lubricate it and also to help keep those chunks out of the way, and it just give it a quick shot here. This is JB80. Apparently it's twice as good as WD-40. That stands for Justice Brothers, by the way. I'm going to start with the 150 here, keeping the angle straight until I feel it. That's all it takes. As you can see, all of that metal shavings in there, it's really working. Problem with this JB80 is it gets on your hands and you can smell it the rest of the day. Okay, so it did look like it took off quite a bit just with that 150. We're going to go ahead and hone it out with the 600 here. Find the angle just right. That's usually quite a bit more than I do with my carbide cutting tools, but this, being that it's this old and that worn out, I want to make sure and get a good grind on it so that we have a nice fresh edge. And that's feeling pretty sharp. I'm going to go just a little bit further, making sure to keep this angle correct as well. I'm not applying a whole lot of pressure on it either. As you can see, all of this carbide in there, so we know it's doing its job pretty well. I'll wipe it off on the old universal towel, the pant leg. And you can see there that it's actually, I didn't get it really flat. You can see it's working on that edge over here more than this side over here. So I'm going to take a little bit more off. Now the front edge is pretty good and sharp, so I'm happy about that. Doing a circular pattern, although it does not really matter all that much which direction you go when it comes to the carbides, because we're really after this front edge point here. Okay, I'd say we have ourselves a winner. Not very sharp now, I can feel that. That's going to make a good cutting tool. So I've got a piece of mahogany here that I glued up for some project a while back. I don't even remember what, but obviously I didn't use it. So we're going to try and make a mahogany handle for our parting tool. One thing I wanted to mention is I like to keep my bed here pretty well lubricated. I use a paraffin wax like this, but even more so I'll take some wax paper that I've used for another project. A lot of times I'll cover my bed up when I'm applying any kind of finishes. When you're done with it, it works real great just to rub on here and lubricate, and that way the tool rest slides real easy and you don't have any catch-ups on it. We're going to set this up here. I'm going to put my homemade tool rest here. I just welded this up because I didn't like the factory one so much. Not to mention it's been cut down to make pens and it doesn't give me a whole lot of range on it. So I'm going to use this one. It's a lot heavier stock. You can see it's 1-inch bar. I've also made several custom ones to get inside bowls and get different angles. We're going to set this up here. We're going to turn this down from square. It's really rough right now, but we will be using our homemade carbide tools here that we've made. This is a rounded one here. I've got square, radius, diamond heads, everything. We'll probably use a combination of all those on here. Feels like it's been a really long time since I've done any spindle turning. I've been working on bowls mostly, but we'll give this a shot. I chucked it up in my Nova G3 chuck here. I did put the end stock in here just to keep it nice and tight. We'll tighten everything down, make sure that the tool rest is snug. We're good to go. I'm going to start it off on a really low speed to get this square edge off of here. I should preface it, I've never turned mahogany either, so we'll see how that goes. I'm going to speed it up just a little bit. As you can see, it takes no time at all for these carbide bits. They're super sharp. I haven't sharpened this one in probably close to 100 hours of service. I do rotate it every once in a while to use some cleaner edges, but they stay sharp forever. That's why I love carbide. I'm going to switch over to a square bit. You notice I have it offset a little bit. That way I can do it at an angle and the shavings kind of fly away from me instead of at me. This one is a 6-inch radius bit. So barely a little bit of curve to it, but we'll see how that goes. As you can see, it cuts really well. The other nice thing I like about this square one is as you're doing push cuts, it'll cut on this edge as well as the front edge. So you can shave it along the edge there. So as you can see, I've offset it on the tailstock here so that I keep a flat spot towards the end of the tool. As I use the parting tool, that'll give me an indexing point so I can keep it perfectly straight. It'll give me a visual cue on where the center point is, where the vertical point is. So that way it's going to keep a nice vertical cut when I go to use it. Now I'm going to go ahead and give the tool a little bit of a shape, taper it here at the end, make a little bit of a fat spot here for a good grip. I'll taper it back down here and leave a little bit of a grip on the end of it back here as well. Any extra weight on here is good. It'll help to dampen some of the vibration. Okay, so I've cut these little grooves in here for the handle, more for decoration than grip, but I'm going to add a little bit more decorative to it. And we'll take my homemade burning wire here. You got to be careful not to catch any sleeves in there. That's why you don't normally wear a long sleeve. So what I'm doing is just turning down the end here to allow for a bit of a ferrule at the end. I'm going to put a piece of copper pipe down there. It'll help it keep it from splitting out at a later time. It'll also give me a place to drill through the tool handle as well as the carbide blade so that we have a nice solid insert. And I'll probably put a brad here and one up front too. Very nice fit. I left it a little bit tapered there so we can wedge it on. What I'm going to be doing is taking and cutting this with the bandsaw slightly so we can slide the tool in there. We'll cap it off with this, pound that on there so it squeezes everything shut, and then we'll run a couple of brads through there. Well, now we've got the finished blade here. We've got the handle. I did cut it at an angle here so that this back piece would mesh with that. Let's see how she fits. Ooh, that's nice. Okay. Perfect. Now just the simple wedging of that onto there is going to keep that nice and snug, good and tight. We'll probably put a little bit of epoxy in there to help hold it. I'm going to cross drill it in a couple of spots and set that up so that it's nice and firm. And then we'll end up taking it to the anvil and we'll just peen those heads of the brass, or I might even use iron nails for that. And then we'll be done, ready to go, and we'll test it out. Okay, so here's our completed unit. I took it down into the metal shop and I drilled a hole through the ferrule, through the blade, through the wood, and then another one through the wood and the blade itself. Took it to an anvil, peened it over on both sides, and now it's a good solid fit. I think it's going to do pretty well. Let's try it out.